Thank you for allowing us to be up here and tell a little bit about our story. As Ken mentioned, my name is Anoop Mehta. I'm president of Science Systems and Applications, Inc., SSAI. We're located kind of halfway between Washington, D.C. and Baltimore. And I've been in my current role for about 2 years, actually. May 1, just finished 2 years. I've been with the company 37 years. So you're probably asking why so late, why so long, to get there, but it did. This is the only job I've ever had. I started when I was in college still, and my second year, and joined the firm as an intern, and moved my way up. So what the company does is, we're actually when I started, it's about two people. Currently, we have about 800. Last year, we did about 125 million in revenue. Our primary customer is NASA, NOAA. We employ scientists, engineers, and what's an accountant doing managing scientists? And I can actually say I do work with rocket scientists because they truly are. And most of them are smarter than I am, but I get to manage them. What the company does is basically federal government contracting. 100% of our business is federal government, which has its own challenges. We compete on contracts, and if you win, that contract is good for 5 years, and then you have to go after it again, no matter how good of a job you're doing. How effective you are. Somebody could come in and underbid your job, so you could lose. Primarily, 3 areas of our business: science, engineering, and data analytics. Science, primarily looking down at Earth and looking up in the space, studying weather phenomena, studying long-term weather predictions, doing long-term weather predictions, doing remote sensing. So we employ, as I said, scientists, meteorologists, computer scientists, programmers, so all kinds of high-end. Roughly 65% of our workforce, PhDs and master's degrees, so higher education. In engineering, we do instrument engineering, meaning designing the instruments that get flown on the space shuttles or spacecrafts, and that can measure the pulse of the Earth. And we actually also gather the data. That's the data analytics part. We get the data, we process it, we analyze it. Our scientists do the research, and they publish papers. So as you can see, a wide array of work, and the underpinning technology is what drives everything that we do. So, like I said, been with the company now 37 years, and I'm very fortunate to be actually a number of times voted one of the best places to work in the Hampton Roads and in Washington metropolitan area. And I'm excited to be here, and here's Stu.
Great. So my story is a little different than Anoop. I'm the guy that can't hold a job. So I've been at a lot of different places through my years. I spent the first about 10 years of my career in public accounting at a large regional firm in Boston. Thought I'd never leave public accounting. I love public accounting. I love the technical side of it. I love the mentoring. And I did a lot of business development. Brought in a lot of clients and said, this is terrific. One of the partners left, went to a client that I was a manager on, a large family-owned $250 million company. And about 6 months after he left, he reached out and said, hey, Stu, I need you to come out to the company. The company's name was Very Fine. It was a producer of fruit juices. And I said, okay, great. And he said, but it's not an accounting or a finance job. So I'm a CPA, not supposed to have many personality skills. And like, okay, what do you want me to do? And He says, I want you to go fix sales and operations planning, which was probably a key to my overall career, because I ended up going in, and it was terrific. We had 2 sales organizations that, so when they submitted information, they would sell what they could sell. Marketing did marketing what they thought was really good to market. Purchasing brought the cheapest materials they could for whatever they could. Production made whatever they could the most efficient in the plant. And finance put together pro formas and financials that the bank would love. So it was great. We had all this excess inventory. We're producing stuff we couldn't sell, and we're marketing things that we didn't even sell. So, yeah. So that was terrific. So here I came in and had to deal with all these elements and pull them together. And then after about a year of getting that solved, I did some financial stuff, but more strategy stuff. And I ended up going out and going to trade shows, going to customer visits with the sales organization, presenting the spending plans to customers for the year, and got more involved and saw a lot of the business. Coming out of public accounting, as probably most of you have, I thought I knew everything about the client because I was issuing financial reports and attesting that they were fairly stated, which they were. But when I got to the other side of the table, it was like, wow, there's a lot of stuff I don't know. So I spent about 5 years there, ended up having our first child. The problem with verifying it was 75 miles away from my house. I figured that it would be great if I could be a father. So I ended up becoming the first CFO for another client of mine, which was a security integration company, really small company. Husband and wife created this organization when nobody really knew what ATM cards were. Security system integration, fancy word for access cards and CCTV, which is very popular today, but back then it wasn't. Ended up really putting my hands in a lot of different areas of the business. The husband and wife that owned it knew that they couldn't take it to the next step, and their goal was to sell it. So I got to get involved in really every element of the business except for installations, because I'm not that mechanical. So I worked for them for a number of years, and we ended up selling that to Siemens, which was great and put me out of a job. And so I went to go work for a PE firm as a client CFO. They had just purchased a large family-owned business out of bankruptcy, and they needed somebody to help them turn that around. So this company made black sticky tape, and it was number 2 to 3M. So 3M had about 85% of the market, and we had about 5 to 10% of the market. Better product, but not the advertising wherewithal that 3M had. We had a joint venture in China, joint venture in Germany, subsidiary in Denver. We had 2 facilities in Spain, and then we had corporate headquarters in Massachusetts. So it was really great. I ended up spending every 6 weeks in Spain, traveling out to Denver, and we got to a point where we turned the entity around. But if any of you have ever worked with PE firms, you know they want turnaround very fast, and they weren't earning 35% on their money each year. So they fired 2 CEOs. The second one, I ended up, I'm sitting in my office. Their office is in Philly. My office is in Massachusetts. I look up one day at 4 o'clock, and the director of the PE firm is standing in my office door. And I said, oh, this is great. It's been fun. I've learned a lot. It's been close to home. And he said, we just fired the CEO, but we want you to stay on board. Okay. And so I said, well, what's the issue? And his question was, how do we make more money faster? And I just described to you the company structure, and we had this entity in Massachusetts, Canton, Massachusetts, accounting, HR, IT, full-blown R&D facility, and a sales organization. No plant, no facility. So, and they were the parent company. So I had suggested, well, let's eliminate the parent company, decentralize everything, put the R&D facility in one of the manufacturing facilities because we can go to market much quicker. And he said it could never happen. Well, okay. 2 weeks later, he came to my office and said, I have this great idea. We're going to shut down the parent company. We're going to create we're going to create a sales organization. We're going to create an R&D organization. Will you stay on board and wind down the company? So I said, sure. And we created 2 companies, wound down the company, but again, took myself out of a job. I was fortunate enough, just about as everything was winding down, we paid down the bank debt, spun everything out. I was offered a position at a joint venture in Massachusetts, and the joint venture was between Balfour Beatty and National Grid, and it was really open book contract, and they had just won a $1 billion contract to redo the transmission lines and substations in New England. So we started with 0 employees and 0 in sales, and we created an organization in the first year that had $40 million in sales and 250 employees. I reported directly to the board for that position, and it was really fun. And we got to a point where it wasn't fun, and so I ended up taking the summer off, spending it with my 2 children at the time, and then found another job in the fall, October of 2010, as Chief Operating Officer of a guard service company. So it was a family-owned guard service company, largest in New England, and we did guard services for Class A space, and we did high-end corporate clients. Great opportunity. 2 guys owned it, family business. Walked in the door, there was absolutely no cash. They had literally about $5,000 of availability. Knew that going in, and so we started working on that and cleaning it up, and my role as CEO was now more broader, and I had a lot of customer interaction. A friend of mine gave me a call and said, hey, I need a CFO company in West Warwick, Rhode Island. I've just been named president. Do you know of anybody? And I said, not off the top of my head, but let me shoot some emails out. So this was in December. In February, he called me back and said, hey, I'm still got that position open. And I said, yeah, I haven't had any luck. And he's like, yeah, let's go to dinner. And I was fine. I had given a commitment to this other organization. About March 3rd, I started as CFO, Executive Vice President and CFO. Had responsibilities for human HR, human resources, IT, finance, accounting, warehouse, safety, production planning, and something else in there. So I spent the next 5 years doing that. In betwixt all that, about a year after he hired me, he decided to leave the organization. And so I had a conversation with the family member who owned the company at the time. He took over the president and CEO role when my friend left, and I said, I came on board to work with Eric. I'm happy to stay on board working for you, but if you do make a change at the top level, I want to be able to get out of my contract. And I think that kind of laid the groundwork for what transpired about a year ago. So that's my long, drawn-out, unable to keep a job history.
So, almost indistinguishable careers. Guess which of these guys we call? Just, no, you got it, that guy. I just think people's careers and career choices are just endlessly fascinating, right? And if, the main thing I heard here, a couple of things I heard here, and Anoop didn't speak much about the roles he held before in his path, and I'm sure he will, but I'm going to guess that they're going to include a lot of things that really had nothing to do with finance or were apart from finance. So the perspective I bring is, as an outside executive search firm, we're hired by, in this case, we would be hired by the board to do a search for a CEO. And in that, I always tell people in my position, 90% of what happens in the company I'll never see, the way you see it, but 10% of what I see you'll never see, because that's sort of the way it works. But But the themes here that I thought were really interesting, if you're a CFO thinking about how do you advance and become a CEO or whatever you might want to do, the first one is the willingness to take risk. Anoop stayed in the same place for many years, but I guarantee he could give us 3 or 4 examples of roles he took where people, probably including your wife, said, "You're going to do what?" Right?
Yes.
So you've got to be able to take risk, and certainly Stu did a lot of that. Secondly, you've got to get outside of the finance bubble. And, S&OP, Sales and Operations Planning, that's a great transitional kind of a role. Strategy is another one of those roles that sort of bleeds into other areas. Stu talked about, and I'm sure Anoop would do the same, exposure to customers, being out with customers. You've got to be viewed as something different than just, a CFO. And there's nothing wrong with being a CFO, but if you want to be something different, you got to behave a little different. The other thing, and I don't know, you guys might have different answers to this. I actually often ask this question in interviews when I talk to people about their careers, and the question I ask is, so, you're at this point in your career. Do you have a master plan? Do you want to be somewhere in 10 years and somewhere in 15 years, or are you managing your career a little more opportunistically, and as things happen, you're willing to jump on them? You guys could answer that. The only thing that matters about the answer is, are you managing your career? Because if your plan is to wait for somebody to recognize, your brilliance and indispensability, and come to your office and offer you a huge promotion, that's probably going to take a little while, right?
I think one of the biggest thing is if you don't do that, and you're not in front of the customers and taking on different roles and taking a little risk, you tend to get pigeonholed. And I'm sure many of you probably understand what I'm talking about. In the sense they see a finance role or CFO strictly in a financial reporting numbers type person. Early on in my career, actually, I love what I did. I love the numbers, but my personality was that I wanted to be out there. So early on, I started meeting with customers, and even though I didn't really understand what they were talking about, but having at least being in their presence gave me the confidence to be able to talk a little bit about the science and the engineering, understood their challenges. So as a numbers person, as a CFO, or I could relate and I can say, okay, here's your challenges, here's your problems. Let me see what I can do to come up with something. So working with the program managers, and they didn't know the numbers side, but having understanding a little bit of the technical end, I could kind of blend both of them and present a good solution. So that was one of the main things early on. I recognized that I needed to do that. And then, again, getting outside your comfort zone. Getting on the boards of organizations was very critical for me, and that opened up a lot of doors. In a sense, not different opportunities or different companies, but being able to see how is it like to be, a CEO. So in different boards, you interact with a lot of CEOs or high-level, executives, and you kind of start talking to them and getting a feel for what does it take to run a company. So I think those experiences early on helped me. And I'll tell you a story. In 2000, we had won a large contract which really doubled the size of the company. And the contract we won was from a large aerospace industry company. And we hired quite a few of their senior leadership. And when they came on board and they saw what I did, and they say, well, you're not like a typical CFO. You're out there in customers and you're visiting them. I said, yeah, this is what I know, and this is how I understand what the challenges are. So I think those are some of the things that are critical for anybody to continue to move and move up the ladder.
Yeah, so I think there's two things. It's probably John mentioned was risk and negotiating for yourself. So, risk. When I was at Verifine, I was kind of the abnormal guy, right? So I'm the finance guy. I'm out traveling, and the sales guys used to call me Donnie Brasco. They're like, "Oh, Donnie Brasco's here," but they loved having me there because they hated dealing with customers on off-invoice programs, MDS spends, what the promotions were. So I was that unusual animal. And I remember every time I went home and said to my wife, "This is what I'm going to go do," and she said, "You're not qualified for that. You can't do that. How can you get that job?" I don't know. I applied for it. And then, so it is about taking those risks and getting outside your comfort zone. And the other thing, I was always very good at negotiating on behalf of the companies and doing what was right for the company, but I wasn't that good negotiating on my behalf. And when I was at Mac Systems, the husband and wife security system integration company, we had numbers of conversations, and the husband and wife said, "You're never going to leave us, right? You're never going to leave." And I said, "Yeah, I'll never leave. I just need, a couple of things." And one of the things was, a change, a CIC. And so I remember my daughter, she was in 3rd or 4th grade, won a trip to Disney World. So we were going to Disney World for 2 weeks. And the owners said to me, "Before you go Friday, we need a copy of this change in control agreement that you had, that you keep talking about. And then when you get back, we'll sign it and we'll be good." And I wanted that because I knew our goal was to sell. So when I went into the company, I said, "What's our goal?" And they said, "We want to, in X number of years, sell the business." So I worked with it. They said, use the lawyers, use whoever you need to do. So we pulled a quick and dirty agreement together. I gave it to him the Friday I left, and I came back 2 weeks later, and now the husband pulled me into his office and said, "Hey, I need to talk to you about this." And he says, "We can't sign this." And I said, "Okay, that's your business decision." And that's when I left. I said I knew I needed to make a change because it wasn't going to happen there. And it was probably the first time we really negotiated on my own behalf. And I ended up fortuitously got a call from a headhunter, and the PE firm job came available, and I ended up leaving. And it was probably the most difficult day when I left. I mean, I was crying, they were crying. I'd been there a long time. We were personal friends. And about 3 months later, they said, "We need to sell the business." They gave me a call and said, "Can you come to lunch?" And they said, "We need to sell the business." And I said, "Why?" And they said, "We can't find anybody to replace you. So we're going to sell the business. So will you help us sell the business?" So on weekends, nights, and vacation, I ended up selling the business for them. And they gave me a fee at the end because I said, I'll just do it because I'm nice. They ended up giving me a fee that was equivalent to all I was asking for. So it worked out for me because it got me to where I am today. But it was the first time I negotiated. I was willing to walk away from the table.
So I've got a couple of questions here that are very much related to this conversation, and I'll ask them both together because I think they're very much related. How can you market yourself for the role you know you can do, CEO, when it's higher than the role you have done, CFO, and suggestions on strategies to overcome the board's or CEO's reluctance for the CFO to get involved in anything other than finance?
Well, I mean, I think, I came from a privately held, and it's still a privately held company. And I think you constantly have to show the value that you can bring to the organization. In my case, it was a long term in terms of the planning to have the role that I currently have. It started actually back in 2006, so I took over in 2015. So almost 9 years we had those conversations. And when you're in a small privately held company, and the owners ran the company, and you were in the CFO role, it's very difficult when you help build a company, and the owners who ran the company and built the company, to walk away from it. So we have to understand that. It's hard, difficult to walk away and turn it over to someone. So patience certainly paid off. But one of the things that I think, what I did, and hopefully it's a strategy that you can use as well, is that one of the most fearful factors that the owners have is, what am I going to do after I turn over the company to somebody else to run it? And so when we went in to present where we think we can take the company and show the value, what we're bringing in, and how we can grow this company to the next level, we sat down with the owners, and I had a whole presentation about some of our strategies, and which I think what we need to move from to take the company to the next level. The thing that I did was the first page of that presentation, I left it blank. And when I met with the owners, and I also had our CEO, Chief Operating Officer there, we make a very good team, and now with our CFO, three of us kind of run the company. The first page I left blank, and what I did was ask them point blank, we're going to make this change. We're going to go this far, and I think I can take the company to the next level. On the first page, this is your page to fill. And I asked them, what are the 4 or 5 things that you never want to change about this company? And they started telling me and started typing up. I said, this is the document. The first page is yours. Your legacy will continue on, and we're going to preserve those values. I think that was one of the key things. So they felt that the company was in good hand, and they had an input in the direction of the company. So when we're going and we're looking for that, you got to show you're adding value. And you got to show that they're going to continue to be an integral part of the organization.
So I would answer the marketing question from a different perspective. So many, we have 2 people here who became CEOs in the companies in which they were CFOs. And they were known and loved, and they were proven.
I'm not sure about the loved part.
Well, they were known. But many of you are going to be looking at outside companies, right? You're not necessarily thinking you're going to do this in your own company. So part of marketing yourself is going to involve, search firms, frankly, and sort of making the connection with search firms about how do you get them to consider you a viable candidate, essentially for a role you've never held, right? But you may be completely ready for. So I just want to throw a couple of things out about search firms that people don't always know and don't always operate on. The first thing is this you may know. The search firm is not working in your interest. If you've ever worked with a search firm, it probably feels that way. But they really are working in the client's interest. And we're engaged and retained by the corporation, by the board, by whoever. So that's who we are representing. And that's an essential thing for people who are candidates to understand, as silly as that sounds. But all the time I get calls from people who think we're going to, manage their career or something, or help them find something. So the second thing I would tell you about search firms, we are not rocket scientists, okay? We are very literal people. So when we sit with the client and they make a list of 8 things they want this person to have in their background, we interview candidates and we start checking them off, right? So there is very little motivation, incentive for a search firm to present you as a what we call an off-spec candidate. So you've got to figure out why you're a great off-spec candidate. We do this a lot. The large global firms virtually never do this because they're going to check all the boxes. But there could be any number of things that make you a great candidate, even though you may not be able to check every single box. And I think that's something that you can work on as you work on your strategy. Another thing I would add is I don't know how many emails and calls I get every day from people who want to meet with me and talk to me about their careers. It's not because it's because I'm a search person. So if I took all those calls and had all those meetings, I would close the firm because I would have no time to do executive search. So here's how to get noticed by executive search firms, because you kind of do want to be on their radar. Don't call them cold. It's a complete waste of time. How many of you have a LinkedIn page? Good. How many of you are not wearing a shirt on your LinkedIn picture? Anybody? Good. Okay. We have a file in my firm of unusual pictures. There's one file of people not wearing shirts. There's another file of people holding fish. Holding up fish. A way to connect with me as a search professional is not to link in with me. Feel free to do it. The people that work for me, who really I work for, tell me to accept everybody who wants to link into me so they can get access to them. Use your network. You know people in the search industry, right?
Yes.
So use your network. You may use them in your firm. That doesn't mean they're going to help you, but use your network to get to people. And all you really want from a search firm is for them to know you exist and to get into their database and to try to build a relationship. And this is the last thing I'll say. Everybody says they want a relationship with a search firm. You don't really want a relationship with a search firm. You want the search firm to present you for a great job, right? So a relationship, by definition, is a two-way thing. So when next time you get a call from a search firm who says, hey, I'm looking for a CFO who has a blah, 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 you say, no, I don't know anybody, and you hang up the phone. That doesn't engender a relationship. An alternative to that is to say, not for me, but let me give it some thought. I'm going to send a few emails out. I'll get back to you. How easy is that? When I tell you that will put you in the top 5% of the people, the hundreds of people we talk to, trust me, we have a special code in our database for those people because they actually want a relationship. They're plugged in, and when we are working on something else, we call them and we get to know them. Easy to do.
So the only thing I would just add to that, I think you need to tell people that you want to be the CEO, right?
Great.
So you need to say, I want to be the CEO, and there is a hurdle. I mean, people have told me you need to be part of the club to get into the club. Well, it's hard to be a CEO when you haven't been CEO before. So it's letting people know. Number two, it's trying to get those titles that will get you there. So maybe you need to take a step backwards and be COO or CEO of a smaller entity. And now I'm speaking totally from privately held, private equity-backed firm. Never worked for a public company in my life, and I can probably guarantee I never will. And then the third story I guess I would have is, so when I was at Bradford, and I said to the owner who was the president, said, I want to be the CEO. How do we get there? And so he knew that, and he valued what I brought to the table. We have an independent board of 6 people. I went to dinner with them. One of them owns a large sporting goods company. He said, Stu, will you recruit our CFO for us? Because I've had 10 over the past 10 years and can't find anybody. Helped him find a new CFO. Actually, he wanted somebody else, and I said, no, you need to take this guy. The guy's still there. And so you build all these actions of success, and that brings your regard up. And you need to have exposure to things that you don't have exposure to. You just can't sit behind your desk and put out great financial statements or give great financial advice or great costing sheets. Or, I had a young CFO approach me, and he said, I want to be CEO. So I had breakfast with him and said, well, where are your gaps? And he says, no, I'm pretty well-rounded. I think I've got it. So I said, well, what do you know about your customers? Do you go out and visit your customers? No, I've never done that. I said, okay, that's a gap, right? So you need to go fill those gaps.
So that's a pretty good segue into actually the first question I got, and my suspicion it's either that bald-headed guy who presented yesterday or a new devotee. And the question is, to all, has the key to your opportunities been a direct result of networking or other factors? And so to that point about developing relationships, to what extent, besides what you had done, Stu, has networking been important in what you've done?
Yeah, so networking has been, greatly important. So from a very young point in my career, I said I worked in public accounting. I got involved in Chamber of Commerce's. I created a small business committee at the local Chamber of Commerce because I was out trying to develop business. So, and that's not me, I grew up in Maine. My wife said she met me in college and I wore flannel shirts and didn't talk to a soul. So for me to get outside my box was tremendous in her eyes. So doing that, always got involved. I got involved in the AICPA and been involved in that. I've been involved in nonprofits. I was in the town government. I did finance committee. I chaired it for 3 years on that. Was involved in several nonprofits. So that has always been key. Over the last several years, I've been doing a lot more networking. I really rarely turn down somebody that wants to have a coffee with me. The search firms, when they call, I'll say to them, hey, I don't know anybody, but I got a large network. Let me see if I can find somebody for you. And you can hear their glee. So networking has been huge. I really think it's not so much what you know, it's who you know. And I'm trying to teach my kids that, and they really don't believe me. But my daughter's going to have a summer job this year. She's a freshman at college, and she got it through a board of director of Bradford.
Well, I was saying similarly, as Stu mentioned, I got involved in the Maryland Association of CPAs back in 1992. I'm still pretty active, and was on the board. I was chair for a year. Then I got on the AICPA Council, again, expanding my network. I met a lot of people, and I really believe that throughout the whole process, a lot of people were involved in the outcome or where I wound up. You get insight from someone here, you get some insight from here. So expanding your network is critical. And then also the Maryland Space Business Roundtable, which is an organization that has membership from large, multi-billion-dollar organizations to small companies. Again, getting outside my comfort zone. I got on the board, became treasurer, again, finance guy. And when I said that I actually want to run for president, people were looking at me and said, most of these guys have been, pretty much heavy science, engineering background. You don't have any of that. Are you sure? I said, yeah, I think I can run this organization. And sure enough, I became president for 2 years. So again, getting outside the comfort zone, expanding your network, all those things help in developing your career and moving it up.
This may be very obvious, but I'm going to make the point anyway. I mentioned earlier being an off-spec, a person that maybe doesn't have an airtight resume to fit the role. Why is somebody going to take the risk? Because that's what it feels like to them, of putting you into a role that on paper you may not be exactly right for. And the reason they're going to do that, one of the reasons they may do that, is because they know you, they've had experience with you, they know your character, they know your drive, they know who you are, and that outweighs your qualifications. So that's kind of networking, but that really is that's why, search firms are such a low yield endeavor probably if you're trying to make any kind of a move, industry move or do something very different than you used to do. It's the people who know you and respect you and have worked with you. That's really where 80-90% of your energy should go.
So I've got one more question here on the tablet, but is there anybody else in the room that's maybe not hooked into the app that has a question that they would like to ask? Okay. Then I'll... Oh,
you
got right behind you here, Donna.
And I'm just speculating, but...
You're speculating?
Yeah. Okay. Okay. The biggest downside that I would see for a CEO position would be industry experience. Okay, so how do you make up for something like that? And most leadership books say a good CEO is probably a good team builder. Doesn't matter the industry, it's the team they build behind them. So,
Yeah, it's a great.
Is there a way to answer that, though, to somebody like us?
Yeah, so I'll give you my view of this because this is a conversation we have every search we start. We say, are you looking for somebody with, how important is industry experience, we say. And the clients will sometimes say, it's very important, but more than likely, they will say, it's important, but it's really not critical. Because we're full of people here that have industry experience. Then we present a slate of candidates who don't have industry experience, and the client says, who the hell are these people? They don't know anything about our industry. So that happens sometimes. So you have to sort of, we do a lot of work with wholesale distribution companies. We will often hear from wholesale distribution companies, particularly for maybe an operations kind of a role, wholesale distribution is a little behind on technology and a little behind on that kind of stuff. We don't really want to talk to people out of wholesale distribution. We think retail is close enough. They're better with technology. They still have low margins, and we want to talk to those people. So you sort of have to make the rationale. Some clients, it's a strategy to get somebody outside of the industry. Others consider it absolutely essential. I find it different company to company. But most people, in their heart of hearts, are more comfortable with people from their industry.
So thanks for that question. That's a good segue to the one that I've got on my tablet, and it's sort of a shifting gears from, how do you get there to, the skills you've got now. And it says, what are some of the key skills you would say has made you successful as a CEO that may be different than as a CFO?
Good question.
So, everybody always asks me, what's the difference? And quite frankly, before I got the job of CEO and president, my thought process was, it's going to be no different because I've had broad experience, broad responsibility within the organization. So it's just, I'm sliding down to a different office, it's going to be the same. Now, in my world, it's been totally different. Totally different. Somebody said to me, as president, you have all the power, but none of the power, which is really quite true, I find, because as a CFO, I brought my expertise in that area, no matter how broad it was. My job was to build the pros and cons from my viewpoint, and then let my peers in sales and operations build theirs, and then build a consensus. And I would fight really hard and present really hard what I thought was right from that perspective. Today, I am the neutral person, right? So I need to hear everybody out. I need to weigh everything evenly, and I need to give everybody a chance to weigh in and to make a decision collectively through consensus that's the right decision. I don't say everything needs to be done by consensus, and there's going to be decisions that I need to make and go out on a limb and make on my own, but it's my responsibility to really listen closely to each other. I was just out to dinner Tuesday night in San Diego with my EVP of operations, and we were with a colleague that we had sold the business to, and we were talking just about this, and I said to Jimmy, I just kind of gave that answer, and Jimmy said, yeah, I think it's true. He said, I really clashed with Stu when he was the CFO, but I don't clash with him anymore. So it's really a totally different perspective. I found very soon off that I had to really push people to the new Vice President of Finance and Accounting, because everybody would come to me with the accounting or the finance or the costing, and I said, well, what does Eric think? You need to talk to Eric about it, because I really had to get out of that mode and let people see him as the financial expert and not me.
Boy, same experience. The only, I guess, the difference is I can't blame things on anybody else. You're it. That's it. Previous days, well, it's not my decision. Somebody else made it. But no, it's your decision now. But I agree that you tend to play a little bit more neutral role, and you get advice from everybody and then kind of see where things are, and hopefully they'll make the decision amongst themselves. But if not, then be prepared to make that decision. I will admit, though, and our CFO is here, I will admit that there's sometimes people will come that have been with the organization a long time, and they've seen you in that role as CFO, and that's it. Keep coming back and asking questions, and there's that urge to, well, yeah, let's do it this way, rather than saying, well, you really need to be asking the CFO. So sometimes, you do get urges to just get in there and answer the question as you were used to doing for a long time. But having a great team is so important. I am so fortunate to have the management team that I have, I can honestly say after 37 years that I look forward to going to work every single day. I love what I do. I love the people that I work with. It's important.
So I've got another question here. Which of the development factors on the screen or other contributed most significantly to attaining your position as CEO? Can you see them, or you want me to read them off to you? So it's expansion of job scope responsibilities, special projects, stretch assignments, executive coaching support from the outside, job rotation, external executive education, auditioning, i.e. tested in another executive role, mentoring from a member of the board, external board service, international assignments, and apprenticeship with the CEO.
I would actually, my view, there's three: expansion of job scope, responsibilities, the special projects. I think taking over one of the key initiatives in the organization. That way, and hopefully you're successful, and people will see what you've done with that, and certainly the external board service. I think those are three that come to my mind.
Yeah, I think the expansion of job scope and responsibilities, the breadth of responsibilities that I've had. I'll say the executive coaching and support. So probably about 2 years before I took over the role of CEO, I was very interested in getting on some external boards, and so the company sponsored me in a I'll call it. I really framed it as executive coaching, but it was a bunch of looking what your strengths are, looking at what your weaknesses are, doing every psychology test that's out there and matching that up. And that really, it was good to hear that and affirm the things that you knew, but it also gave the ownership and the president and the board a good feel that, I was taking stock of that they were taking stock of that, and so that was a positive. And then the third thing I would call it is the board interaction, is getting comfortable and having the board of the 6 independent directors comfortable with me, because if they were not, they wouldn't have supported me becoming that president.
Could I ask you guys a question? The board, outside boards that you've been involved with, for-profit, non-profit, both?
Mostly nonprofit for me, yeah.
Yeah, I say mostly nonprofit as well.
I think that nonprofit board service is a thing you have a lot of control over, because some of these things you may not have a lot of control over. But you can go into the community, you can get involved with a substantial, I think is usually better, nonprofit organization. I've been on boards nonprofit boards for my whole career, and I've learned, if you contribute, you're going to end up in a leadership role, right? You're going to be setting strategy, you're going to be doing what a CEO does. You're going to expose yourself to a whole new network of people that you are never going to meet in your regular life. And it just gives you, I think, a very different perspective. And I also think it says something about who you are, sort of as a person, and your values, and your willingness to contribute. So I would just sort of put in a plug.
In fact, that's one of the things that did 2 years ago, is I put that as one of the requirements in all our senior leadership positions, a goal that they need to be involved in a community-based organization, but in a leadership position. So if their interest is professional organization, that's fine. If their interest is in a community organization, that's fine. Even Boy Scouts, Girl Scouts, whatever you're passionate about, get involved in, but make sure it's in a leadership position. And I know that helped me tremendously, and so that is one of the goals that we have for all our senior leadership right now, that they have to be involved in the board.
So shifting a bit from the outside interaction, I've got a question here about what advice do you have concerning initiating interaction with the owners and board members? So taking the initiative on your part, I guess, and what sort of strategies?
I think it's critical. You probably already know where you stand. You might not have explicitly had that conversation, but I think it's imperative that you have that conversation, because if you say to the president or the board, hey, I really want to be the next CEO. I know, Katie's going to be retiring in 2 years, 3 years, 6 months. I really think I'm capable of taking that position. They're going to tell you yes or no. And if they don't say yes or no, and they give you a gray answer, you need to say, what do I specifically need to get into my resume, into my core competencies, that will make you feel comfortable in making me the next president? And if they say no, and it's really important to you, and there's factors that you can't overcome, you know that you have to move on at some point. And they know that you'll be looking as well. And so I think it brings it to the forefront. But it's if you don't tell them, or if you don't have that conversation, you both are shooting with blindfolds on.
I think that's true. I would add, I think that you're going to get a lot more value and mileage out of demonstrating your capability than telling them you're capable. And a good way to do that, and you talked about kids. I have 3 kids in the workforce, and when they took their first jobs, I said to them all the same thing, and I think this applies to people here. And I said, you have a day job, and then you have another job. Your day job is to do a great job at whatever they hired you to do. Your second job is to find the pain in the organization and offer to help fix it. I don't care where it is. I don't care if it's the receptionist. I don't care where it is. Find it, raise your hand and say, I think I could help you with that, and help. And I'm telling you, That will advance you faster than anything. Looks like you've got a question over there.
Oh, question in the room, Donna. I've got one here as well. Is yours related to this conversation? No. Go ahead.
I guess the question, Anoop, you said it took 9 years for you to become the CEO. Have you given any thoughts to the next CEO?
Oh yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think one of the things that we started working is succession planning, and part of the rationale for bringing in the requirement for all our senior leadership to go through boards of their interest or what they're passionate about is precisely that. You know, worst thing you can have is when you decide that you're going to move on and do something else, and there's nobody that interested in taking over that role. You know, what we did, again, 2 years ago when we started to plan for succession planning, back then the COO and I started talking with, and at that time the company was roughly 700. Out of 700, we talked to 60 individuals, 2-on-1, to understand, engage what their interests are, and what roles they'd like to see. And back then, when the COO asked that question, and at that time I was still CFO, how many of those individuals wanted the COO role, his job, and there was only one individual. And we looked at each other and said, that can't be. I'd rather have 4 or 5 individuals that are looking to move up to that, and then find somebody within the organization that could fill that role. So yeah, I mean, I've already I love what I do, but certainly there's a life after also, and we're hoping that the next CEO will be somebody from within the organization.
Got anything to add to that, Stu?
No, we have not. We're in the process of trying to build some succession and some bench depth at the director level. So we have we're about a $100 million company, and we have about 400 employees. So really at the director level is where we're focusing.
Okay. There's another good question here. What is one of the hardest challenges you experienced when transitioning from CFO to CEO?
My biggest challenge was, again, the perception. Not having the background, science, engineering background, which is what we do, overcoming that in the community. I think within the organization, our folks were very comfortable because I was kind of doing that for a long time. My job description was wide, and as long as I can remember. So I did a lot of things. So within the organization, there was no real surprise when that happened. But in the community, there was certainly a lot of surprise. So I think the biggest challenge for me was showing that you don't need somebody with a strong science or engineering to run an organization that is science and engineering. I had enough understanding of what we do to be able to have those conversations with our partners and when we team with other organizations or other companies. So overcoming that was probably one of the biggest challenges.
And so I would say maybe there was 2 things. So number one, which the first thing took me totally by surprise, well, a piece of it did. The question was always, how will everybody in the organization feel when this happens? And most could see the writing on the wall, so it wasn't a surprise. But my direct reports, for the most part, were upset because they were no longer reporting to me. And I don't think it was that I was such a great person, but they felt that it was the demotion because now they were going to report to somebody else. And it took me, quite frankly, totally by surprise that, my director of HR is like, I'm happy and you'll do a great job, but I'm going to report to somebody else, and I used to report to you. And so that was a surprise. The business challenge was, so now what, right? So what do you do? And we had a plan, and really the plan was about rolling out culture. And you might say, well, you had an organization that's been around 140 years, didn't it have culture? It had culture, but I wanted it to be a point where everybody knew why we were in existence, and then set the behavioral values that I expected. And so it's a long journey to get there. So it was really starting to make people believe that it was meaningful, that they were part of setting that, and that it was something we were going to live by.
So that's a terrific segue to another question that I've had sitting here for a few minutes, and I'll reframe it a little bit. What advice can you give, to our people here in the audience about setting, communicating, and executing on the vision for your organization? What tips can you give to people for how you do that? How important is it? And what are the best things that you've done, you think?
Yes, I think that's just tremendously important. So I think it's very easy to set a strategy and execute the tactics. That's the easy stuff. It's really black and white. The hard part is creating a culture and creating a behavioral value. So it was very important to the current president, CEO, shareholder, that when I took over, that we had somewhat of a sort of we'll call it a 100-day plan. So the board voted me in on May 12th. January 1st, we had started an unofficial transition plan. So the first thing that we did, and I'll wrap a bunch of stuff together here, is we hired an outside firm, and we hired one firm to create job descriptions for me and one job description for the president that was moving on. We moved him on to executive chairman. He's been with the company since the mid-'70s. His father had been with the company since the 50s. As Anoop said, if you all work for privately held companies, it is their baby. It is sometimes more important than their children. So wanted to give him a sense of he still had meaning and he still had involvement. So that was the first thing. This is what I'm going to do. This is what you're going to do. You're going to get out of my way. And it had to be done. So that was that. And then I worked with another person to develop what I call, a purpose statement. And then once I created mine, I brought in the shareholder. We created a second one that was originated from the first one. Once we were comfortable with that, I brought in my executive VP of Ops and executive VP of Sales, and we created a third one. So we started laying this foundation, and we created one that we could all embrace. And then I had an off-site leadership event with all my directors. And we spent half a day going through the mission statement or the purpose statement, and we created 6 values as well through that process. And we defined what those values were. So, we're customer-focused, and we're always customer-focused. So it's very simple, but it's very meaningful to everybody. And we talked about being customer-first. And it was critical. We're not customer first, because if we're customer first, the customer is going to put us out of business. But we're customer focused always. That frames what we need to do. So we went through 6 of those. I established a quarterly leadership team meeting with the top 25 people in the company. I created a bi-monthly chat with the CEO, which was for all non-leadership people. So we take 9 people, rotate them through it every other month. We sit down for an hour with them. We revamped, we tried to visualize the values. So to me, we had the values on paper, and I had a simple idea on how we were going to visualize them. And people said, no, you can't, that's not visualization. So we now have tremendous visual, tremendous color. If you start walking through our manufacturing facility of 140 years old, you might think we're a tech company. We've got colors on the wall. We've got people wearing T-shirts with the values. So I think it's really important, and it's not something we can say these are the values. You need to and then move on. It's a slow process, and it's helped me In our quarterly leadership team meetings, we now are reading a book. It's called Above the Line by Urban Meyer, and it talks about response, and it fits in with our values. It verbalizes how I see how we should act. So we read a few chapters, we discuss that. I have the discussion leaders be my two guys from the exec team. So, long way of saying it's really important. You need to spend a lot of effort with it, and you need to just people need to see you doing it, because if they don't see you doing it, they don't believe it. They think it's going to go away. And it's helped me to say to people, these are our values. We're going to live it together. And if you can't live it, you're all nice people, but you need to go find another job, because this is what the company's going to go forward on.
We started in 2012. Again, I would say probably one of our first major shift from moving away from the old ways of doing things to kind of the new way of doing things. We also hired an outside company to come in and help us with our strategic initiative. The path we took is we got a lot of people engaged right off the bat. So there was probably about 30 to 40 individuals, and it was an off-site retreat that we did. And we actually created what we call the meta map that described what our vision, what our values were, and the strategic areas, focus areas that we're going to pursue everything. So it falls into those three specific areas, which one is grow and diversify, second, invest in our people, invest in our brand, and third is optimize the creativity and productivity of the staff. So every initiative kind of falls into those three. So what we're doing actually is rather than this being created at the top, we're getting more and more people involved. And the goal, the ultimate goal really is the 800 or so employees that we have. Every single employee would understand where they fit into the organization, where they add value, and what their role is in the company's vision. We're getting not just the leadership involved, but the employees in creating this culture. And I think that for our business, we believe that's the right model to move forward.
So I think we're out of time, so please join me in giving a round of applause for our panelists.